3 frozen German Shepherd puppies were left at a Navy SEAL's cabin, while freezing rain hammered the Washington coast. Ethan Hayes thought saving them would be one last decent act before he sold the house and disappeared. Then Ranger found a blue mark hidden inside the crate, and 2 men in rescue jackets came asking for puppies that were never theirs. Freezing rain moved across Freshwater Bay like 1,000 tiny stones thrown from a dark hand, tapping the cedar shingles, the porch rail, and the bare apple branches behind the cabin. Beyond the windows, Port Angeles had already gone silver and blurry, the Olympic foothills swallowed by low cloud, the water hidden, except for the sound it made when wind drove it hard against the rocks. Ethan Hayes sat in his truck at the end of the gravel drive with the engine ticking warm beneath him, and one duffel bag on the passenger seat. He had driven through weather that would make sensible men wait until morning, but waiting had become another word for listening, and he was tired of hearing his own thoughts. The cabin ahead of him had belonged to him and Hannah together. That was how the deed read, how the tax forms read, how every neighbor in the county would have said it if asked. But Hannah had been gone 11 months, and the place looked at him now with its dark windows and wet porch light as if it had kept count better than any calendar. Ethan opened the truck door and the cold bit immediately through his jacket. He was 41, tall, lean, and built with the hard economy of a man whose body had once been used like a tool and maintained because failure could get people killed. His sandy brown hair was cut short out of habit more than vanity. A thin scar rode near his left jaw, pale in the porch light. He wore an olive wax jacket over a gray Henley dark jeans, waterproof boots, and the old military watch Hannah used to call his second pulse. The SEAL teams had taught him how to enter rooms, clear corners, read hands, listen beneath noise. None of that helped with a house that smelled faintly of cedar cold ash, and the lavender soap Hannah used to buy from a woman at the Saturday market. Ethan carried the duffel inside and stopped in the small entryway. The first thing wrong was the quiet. Not empty quiet, accusing quiet. Once there had been Hannah's laugh from the kitchen, the kettle losing patience on the stove, the thump of a heavy tail against the cabinet. Now there was only rain scratching at the roof and a dog standing at the far end of the hall. Ranger did not come to him. The German Shepherd stood square in front of the closed bedroom door, black and tan coat, darkened at the shoulders, ears high. Eyes amber and unblinking. 7 years old, trained by Hannah for search and rescue work before her heart began betraying her in small ways. Doctors first called manageable. Ranger had once greeted Ethan by pushing his entire head into Ethan's palm as if reporting for duty and affection at the same time. Tonight he watched, not angry, worse, careful. Ethan lowered the duffel. "Hey, boy." Ranger's ears shifted. He did not move closer. He turned, walked to Hannah's room, and lay down with his muzzle across his paws. There were punishments a man could argue with, and there were punishments that only breathed quietly at the end of a hallway. Ethan stood there longer than he meant to. He had been on his final overseas rotation when Hannah collapsed in the grocery store parking lot. He had gotten the call through bad satellite delay, promised he was coming, meant every word, and landed too late. Meaning well had never raised the dead. The next week became boxes, plates wrapped in newspaper, maps rolled and banded, coats from the mudroom, boots from the bench, jars of screws from the shed. Ethan worked with the grim focus of a man disarming a device that had already gone off. He placed the real estate sign inside the front window facing the room for now, because turning it toward the road felt like betrayal with red letters. Ranger watched from doorways, always doorways, never underfoot. At night, Ethan slept on the couch, unable to cross into the bedroom, while Ranger kept his post outside the closed door. The distance between them filled the cabin more completely than furniture ever had. On the seventh afternoon, Ethan found Hannah's stray notebook behind paint cans on the mudroom shelf. It was tucked beside a dented metal bowl, old towels, and a half bag of puppy formula sealed with a clothespin. The tape on the cover had her handwriting in black marker. Storm Stray's feed check tags, call Grace. Inside were dates, descriptions, weather notes where each animal had been found, who had been contacted, whether anyone had claimed it. The entries were ordinary and holy in the way Hannah made ordinary things holy by doing them without witnesses. A limping spaniel near Edgewood, a wet hound under the church steps, 2 shepherd mixes by the road after Thanksgiving. The final page had only one line. Do not let cold be the last thing they know. Ethan read the sentence until the room shifted around it. He closed the notebook and set it on the kitchen table instead of packing it. Ranger had come as far as the mudroom doors. She kept better records than I did, Ethan said. The dog looked at him, then at the notebook, then away. That was not forgiveness, it was not nothing either. After dark, the rain thickened into ice. It struck the windows hard enough to make the old glass tremble. Wind shoved through the cedars and found every loose seam in the cabin whining under the eaves, snapping the tarp over the woodpile. Ethan had just taped a box marked kitchen when Ranger rose from beside the bedroom door. The motion was silent, instant, full of decision. His head turned toward the back of the house. Ethan paused. What is it? Ranger crossed the kitchen and stood by the back door, nose lifted, body locked. He scratched once at the wood, then he looked back at Ethan, not with accusation now, but with command. Ethan moved before he admitted he was moving. When he opened the back door, the weather slapped cold water across his face and drove needles of ice down the collar of his jacket. The porch light flickered over the steps, the sagging herb boxes Hannah had never let him throw away, and the black line of cedars crowding the yard. At first he heard nothing but rain. Then Ranger pushed past his leg and went to the lower step. The sound came again. Thin, broken, alive. Ethan followed it to the side of the porch where the roof overhang failed to keep the storm from reaching in. A wooden crate sat wedged against the stone foundation, half covered by a soaked burlap sack. Inside were 3 German shepherd puppies pressed together so tightly they seemed like one soul-shivering animal. They were too young, maybe 4 weeks, maybe less. Their fur was flat and dark with water. One gave a furious little cry that had no strength behind it. One pushed blindly against the corner. The smallest barely moved at all. Easy, Ethan said, and the word sounded foolish the moment it left him. Nothing was easy. Not the rain, not the cold, not 3 bodies trying to keep a spark lit under wet cloth. He lifted the crate and carried it inside with Ranger tight against his knee. Then the cabin changed. No music, no revelation, no angel leaning over the stove. Only work, towels from the dryer. Low heat near the wood stove. The puppy formula Hannah had left behind. Warm water, not hot. Hands steady because trembling could wait. He rubbed each puppy until the fur lifted in damp spikes, checked mouths, paws, bellies, breathing. The smallest male was pale cream gray with a black muzzle and a body so quiet Ethan's jaw clenched around words he would not say. Ash, he murmured because the pup looked like something left after a fire and not finished being alive. The little female kicked weakly at the towel and made a sharp noise as if insulted by rescue. Ruby, Ethan said, you sound expensive. The third, rounder and darker, cried whenever Ranger stepped away. Theo, then, you have opinions about management. For hours, the world narrowed to heat drops of formula, the scrape of rain, and Ranger lying close enough to warm the air around the crate. Ash turned away twice. Ethan cupped him in one palm, lifted the syringe with the other, and waited longer than patience liked. Come on, he whispered. Not after knocking. Ranger lowered his head and touched Ash's side with a gentleness that seemed impossible in a dog his size. Ash opened his mouth. One drop, a swallow, another. Ethan let his breath out slowly. The cabin held the sound as if it mattered. Near midnight, after Ruby had complained herself into sleep and Theo had wedged his nose toward Ranger's paw, Ethan carried the burlap sack to the sink. The smell rose sharper now that fear had loosened. Industrial disinfectant, old motor oil, cheap feed, not a family mistake, not a neighbor's desperate mercy. Something managed hidden mean. He unfolded the sack. A narrow strip of blue fabric fell into the basin with a wet tap. Morning came without mercy, only a paler shade of wet gray pressed against the windows. Freshwater Bay was hidden behind fog and cold rain, and the road toward Port Angeles shone with standing water where gravel had surrendered to mud. Ethan had not slept. He had fed the puppies every 2 hours, warmed towels, checked gums, listened for changes in breathing, and written notes on the back of an envelope. Because calling them the little one, the loud one, and the worried one had started to feel disrespectful. Ash lay in the center of the towel nest, his cream-gray body still too quiet. Ruby had somehow climbed halfway over Theo, claiming heat and command with equal seriousness. Theo complained every time Ranger moved more than a foot away. Ranger lay beside the crate as if the duty had always belonged to him, his black and tan saddle catching the stove light, his right ear scar pale when he turned his head. He had not returned to Hannah's door all night. At 6:08, Ethan called the number written inside Hannah's notebook. Monroe Veterinary Clinic answered on the 5th ring. A woman's voice came through, rough with sleep and authority. If this is about somebody's peacock, I resigned from birds before sunrise. Ethan blinked at the phone. Not a bird. Good birds have lawyers. Name, Ethan Hayes. I found 3 German Shepherd puppies outside my cabin last night, hypothermic, maybe 4 weeks old. One is weak, but swallowing. The sleep vanished from her voice. Are they warm? Slow warmed. Dry towels, puppy formula in drops, no cow's milk. At least one person in this county reads instructions. Bring them in. Warm vehicle, not hot. Keep the box level. And Hayes. Yes, that road near Freshwater is going to be soup with delusions of ambition. Drive like your truck has a newborn in it because it has 3. She hung up before he could answer. Ethan looked at Ranger. I think that was Grace. Ranger's eyes did not soften, but his ears tilted in a way that suggested Hannah had liked the woman. The drive into town took 30 careful minutes. The world outside the windshield was a study in wet bark, pale gravel, and low cloud dragging its belly over the trees. Ethan kept the heat steady and the radio off. Ranger sat in the back seat beside the laundry basket, nose near the towel edge, tracking every small sound. When Ruby squeaked, one ear moved. When Theo pushed against the side, Ranger lowered his muzzle close enough for the pup to smell him. When Ash went too still, Ranger lifted his head and stared at Ethan through the rearview mirror until Ethan pulled over, checked the little body, and got one weak swallow into him. Bossy, Ethan muttered. Ranger did not disagree. Monroe Veterinary Clinic stood near the east side of Port Angeles in a low blue building with white trim and a view of wet pavement, gray sky, and gulls arguing over something no one should have wanted. Dr. Grace Monroe opened the door before Ethan reached it. She was 44, lean, dark-haired, wearing a navy clinic jacket, charcoal pants, and boots with mud on them that looked professionally acquired. Her brown eyes went to Ethan, then Ranger, then the basket. Treatment room 1. Wipe your boots. I have patients who shed less dirt than men. The clinic smelled of antiseptic coffee, metal tables, and damp fur. Grace moved with the calm speed of a person who had long ago decided panic was an expensive hobby. She spread warm fleece beneath a heat lamp, checked each pup's temperature, gums, hydration, lungs, and bellies, then weighed them in a stainless bowl. Ruby objected to the bowl, the light, the air, and possibly democracy. Grace looked over her glasses. That one will need a legal team. She'll appoint herself, Ethan said. Theo whined until Ranger stood where he could see him. Ash did not protest at all. That changed the room. Grace's mouth tightened by a fraction. Ethan saw it because he had spent years reading fractions before bad things happened. She warmed formula, touched one drop to Ash's mouth, waited, touched another. "Come on, little man," she murmured. "Do not let your sister carry the family reputation alone." Ash swallowed. Grace breathed through her nose. "He gets watched closest." Ranger stood at Ethan's left side without crowding the table. Every time Ash's breathing paused too long, the dog's head dipped. Grace noticed. "Still working, I see." Ethan looked down. "He belonged to Hannah more than me by the end." Grace did not dress the sentence with pity. Hannah never thought of him that way. She said Ranger loved you like weather loves mountains by acting tough and staying close. Ethan swallowed. The room suddenly seemed too warm. Grace saved him by turning practical again. "What else came with them?" Ethan took the sealed blue strip and the burlap sack from his jacket and set them on the counter. Grace pulled on gloves before touching either. That told him she had already crossed a line in her mind from odd to possible evidence. She unfolded a corner of the sack and leaned near without letting it touch her face. Kennel disinfectant. Cheap bulk feed. Old oil, brine maybe, or saltwater residue. Not someone's porch mistake, Ethan said. No, unless someone's porch has a loading dock. She checked the puppies again this time, parting the fur inside each ear. With Ruby, she stopped. "Come here." Ethan stepped close. Inside the tiny ear, half hidden under fine hair, was a dot and short-angled line in blue-black ink. Too rough for a tattoo, too deliberate for dirt. Grace found the same mark on Theo. On Ash it was fainter, nearly swallowed by pale fur, but it was there. "Is that legal?" Ethan asked. "Not like this. Legal identification leaves records. This looks like somebody sorting inventory before the inventory is old enough to have names." The word inventory made Ethan's hands curl. Ranger's lips did not lift. He stepped to the counter where the burlap sat sealed, sniffed once, and backed away with unmistakable distaste. Grace watched him. "That is not memory of one bad smell. That is recognition of a whole category." "Bad place?" Ethan asked. "Bad system," she said, and took pictures with the clinic tablet. Grace called Lauren Blake from her office with the door half open. Ethan heard fragments. 3 shepherd pups. Internal marks. Blue strip with H4, possible transport. "Yes, Lauren, I know the difference between weird and illegal. No, I am not overreacting. A man came in with half-frozen puppies and a dog who looks like he wants to testify." When she returned, she carried a folder and a face that had less patience than before. "State animal control is coming. Lauren will want the sack, the strip photos, your porch camera footage, and a statement." "Fine." Grace studied him. "Fine is the sound men make right before they do something theatrical. I retired from theatrical." "Did you get paperwork?" "No." Then it was a resignation letter written in invisible ink. For the first time in days, something like a laugh rose in Ethan's chest and did not die entirely. Grace noticed but did not smile. That was her kindness, apparently. She gave him instructions with the severity of a judge. Small feeding, stable warmth, no visitors, no online photos, no surrendering animals to anyone without Lauren's confirmation. By late morning, the puppies had stabilized enough to stay under Grace's care for a few hours. Ethan hated leaving them in the treatment room. It startled him, the sharpness of it. Yesterday, they had not existed in his life. Now, walking away from the heat lamp felt like leaving candles lit in a house made of wind. Ranger refused to move until Ethan touched 2 fingers to the harness strap. "Come on!" The dog looked once more at Ash, Ruby, and Theo, then followed. In the lobby, Ranger stopped so abruptly that Ethan nearly bumped him. The dog's whole body had changed weight forward, but quiet ears aimed at the front windows. Across the wet street beyond the clinic lot, a white van sat by a closed bait shop. Engine running, windows dark. No person getting out with a leash, no animal carrier, no reason to be there at all. Grace came up behind them and saw it too. "That van was there when I opened." "How long ago?" "Before you called." Ethan stepped away from the glass before whoever sat inside could know he had noticed. The old part of him wanted direct lines movement, a hand on the van door, a voice demanding names. Behind the treatment room door, Ruby gave one shrill complaint, small and alive. It was enough. Ethan put his phone away. Grace's eyes narrowed with approval she would never admit to. "I'll pull the exterior camera. Lauren can collect it." 10 minutes later, the white van was gone. Its tire marks remained in the gravel, deep and wide, packed with gray mud and pale grit that smelled faintly of salt when Ethan crouched near it. Ranger sniffed once, then turned his head toward the road leading west out of town toward old timber roads and shore access lanes, where fog could hide more than water. Grace's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and went still in a way Ethan did not like. "Unknown number," she said. The text was short. "The pups are not safe with the people wearing navy jackets." Ethan read it twice. Ranger gave a low sound beside his knee. Behind them, 3 puppies slept under borrowed heat and somewhere outside town. Someone already knew where they were. The third afternoon brought a softer rain, the kind that slid from cedar needles in patient drops and turned the driveway into a long brown ribbon leading down toward Freshwater Bay. The sky over Port Angeles held no sunlight, only a pale brightening behind cloud, but the worst of the cold had loosened its fist. Ethan drove home from Monroe Veterinary with the puppies in a towel-lined carrier and Ranger in the back seat beside them. Grace had allowed the transfer with all the joy of a woman signing over 3 live grenades to a man she only half trusted. Her written instructions sat on the passenger seat, underlined twice, where they said no visitors, no photos, no surrender without Lauren Blake's authorization. Grace had looked at Ethan over the clipboard and said, "I underlined it for the part of your brain that thinks danger is an invitation." Ethan had told her that part was retired. Grace had replied, "Men who say retired usually mean working unpaid." At the cabin, Ethan checked the tree line before he checked the porch. That bothered him because it was not fear exactly. Fear had uses. It kept boots from stepping where the ground had no bottom. What bothered him was that the house no longer looked empty. It looked exposed. The red real estate sign still leaned inside the front window, facing inward, bright and rude among the stacked boxes. Hannah's stray notebook sat on the kitchen table beside Ethan's new legal pad. 2 sets of handwriting separated by grief and joined by 3 hungry mouths. He set the carrier near the stove and arranged the warming space exactly as Grace had ordered. Low heat, clean towels, thermometer scale, formula notebook. Ranger inspected everything with the grave authority of a supervisor who had not been consulted but intended to correct errors silently. Ethan wrote times, weights, amounts, fed stool notes, and general attitude, because Grace had put that on the sheet. Under Ruby, he wrote, "Angry at physics." Under Theo, seeking union representation. Under Ash, trying. That last word made his pen stop. Trying was not a medical category, but it was the truest thing in the room. Ash swallowed drop by drop, less from appetite than from refusal to vanish. Ruby woke furious and shoved one paw into Theo's face. Theo accepted this with the soft tragedy of the youngest person in a crowded church pew. Ranger lay close enough for the pups to smell him, but not so close that Willow, wherever she was, would have mistaken him for claiming what was hers. That thought had started visiting Ethan more often. Their mother is alive. The note was sealed in plastic, now photographed and logged, but the sentence had moved into the cabin like a cold draft. Ethan could not look at the puppies without imagining a sable German shepherd standing in a kennel somewhere. Body empty, ears raised toward a door that did not open. Ranger knew something too, not the words, the shape of the loss. Dogs understood absence without needing language to make it cruel. By evening, the cabin sounded different, not healed. Ethan had learned to distrust neat little miracles, but it sounded occupied by life. The stove clicked inside. Rain tapped the windows. Ruby complained from a towel fold. Theo made a humming noise whenever Ranger shifted his paws. Ash breathed softly enough that Ethan kept leaning near to check. At one point, Ranger rose and stood beside Ethan as he fed Ash. No command, no hesitation. The dog lowered his muzzle near Ethan's wrist and watched the syringe. "I know," Ethan said. "You'd do it better." Ranger blinked once, which Ethan chose to interpret as agreement delivered with restraint. Ash swallowed 3 drops in a row. Ethan felt something in his chest loosen just enough to hurt. Then Ruby squeaked with outrage over unequal service, and the moment broke. Ethan almost laughed, almost counted as weather changing. The knock came the next afternoon at 4:12. 3 strikes. Even. Firm. Men who knocked that way expected doors to open because their lives had taught them doors usually did. Ranger was on his feet before the 3rd sound ended. The warmth in the room did not disappear, but it went narrow. Ethan closed the feeding notebook, checked the angle of the puppy boss, and moved toward the front window. A dark gray SUV sat in the drive, clean body mud on the tires. 2 men stood on the porch. The older one was medium height, late 40s, brown hair graying at the temples, face open in a practiced way. His navy jacket carried a clean logo over the chest, Harborline Canine Relief, with a white wave curling around a paw print. The second man stood half a step behind him, taller, harder, close-cut brown hair, pale eyes. His jacket was unzipped over a black thermal shirt. He did not look at the door first. He looked at the porch camera, then the side path, then the woodshed. Ethan opened the inside door and left the storm screen latched. "Can I help you?" The older man smiled. "Mr. Hayes, Grant Ellis, Harborline Canine Relief." He lifted an ID badge in a plastic sleeve just long enough to show something official-looking and not long enough to study. "This is my associate, Luke Rader. We're here about the litter you recovered." Ethan kept one hand on the doorframe. "How did you hear about them?" Grant's smile softened. It had clearly practiced compassion in a mirror. Small communities move quickly when animals are in trouble. "We had a transport complication during the storm. The pups belong under our program, and we're grateful you kept them warm. We can take them back now." Behind Ethan, Ranger made no sound. Silence from Ranger was not comfort. It was warning with its coat buttoned. Grant held up a folder. Ethan opened the storm door only far enough to take it. The papers were clean printed, arranged and wrong. No Ash, Ruby, or Theo. No birth date that made sense. Only male A, female B, male C, all tied to a foster code marked H4. The signature at the bottom had the flat sameness of a scanned mark. The license number looked plausible until Ethan noticed the spacing differed from the state format Grace had shown him. Luke shifted his weight one step toward the door. Ranger moved at the same time, placing his body fully between the men and the stove corner. His lips lifted just enough to show one white edge of tooth. The puppy box went quiet. Ruby, who had objected to the entire universe, vanished beneath a towel fold. Theo made one thin noise. Ash's small body shivered. Ethan inhaled. Disinfectant. Old oil, cheap kennel feed, salt. The smell clung to Luke like a second jacket. Ethan handed the folder back through the gap. You'll need to speak with Dr. Monroe and Lauren Blake. State animal control is involved. Grant's face changed by 1 degree, almost nothing, but Ethan had survived by noticing almost nothing. Mr. Hayes, I understand how attachment forms in situations like this. You don't. The words came out level. Grant blinked. Ethan continued. You don't understand what forms in this house. Luke's jaw tightened. Grant tried another door. I heard you were preparing to leave the area, selling the cabin. Moving on can be healthy. A man should know when a chapter has closed. His eyes flicked toward the boxes, then his voice lowered, carrying a kindness sharp enough to cut. Your wife was known for helping strays, a generous woman, but generosity without structure can create confusion after someone is gone. The cabin became very still, not quiet, still. Ethan felt Hannah's notebook behind him on the table like a hand he could not hold. Get off my porch, Ethan said. Grant sighed with professional disappointment. This could become difficult. Already is. For you. For everyone who lies on my steps. Luke stared through the screen at Ranger. Ranger stared back without barking. A dog did not have to spend sound where presence was enough. Grant stepped back first, smoothing the folder against his chest as if Ethan had been unreasonable in a tragic but predictable way. Luke waited 1 heartbeat longer, then turned. The SUV reversed down the drive and disappeared between wet cedars. Ethan did not move until the engine faded. Ranger stayed planted before the puppy box. Ethan closed the door and looked at him. You smelled it. Ranger's ears did not move. Yeah, Ethan said. Me too. He called Grace, then Lauren. Grace listened without interrupting, which frightened him more than her sarcasm. Lauren called back 20 minutes later. Her voice was low-clipped and dry as paper. Harborline Canine Relief lost legal status 2 years ago. The plate is registered to a different vehicle. Do not engage if they return. Photograph everything. A deputy will collect a statement. At dusk, Ranger asked to go out. Ethan clipped the leash to his harness. The air on the porch smelled of cedar rain. Salt water carried up from the bay and the faint chemical stink left where the 2 men had stood. Tire tracks cut across the mud. Ethan photographed them, then stopped near his truck. A folded white paper had been tucked beneath the driver's side wiper. Not blown there. Placed. He checked the tree line, the woodshed, the road bend. Nothing moved. With a glove, he unfolded it. The handwriting was rushed, pressed hard enough to tear the page. Their mother is alive. I am sorry I left them in the storm. No name, no plea. Ranger sniffed the paper, then lifted his head toward the western woods where old logging roads twisted inland from the coast and vanished under moss. Inside, 3 puppies slept under borrowed heat. On the porch, a dead woman's kindness had become a map someone else had trusted in desperation. Ethan folded the note and called Lauren again. We do this right, he said. Ranger stood close beside him now, not leaning, not yet, but close enough that Ethan felt warmth through the rain. Rain softened overnight, turning from hard ice to a cold mist that moved through the cedars behind Freshwater Bay without caring about walls. Morning made the cabin look less abandoned and more besieged, not by men with weapons or sirens, but by evidence bagged on the kitchen table, tire tracks in the drive, and 3 puppies sleeping beneath a heat lamp where Ethan's moving boxes had once waited. Ethan wanted to go west the moment he woke. He wanted to take Ranger, follow the old roads, find the person who had written the note, find the mother dog, find Grant Ellis and Luke Rader, and ask questions in a voice that would not leave much room for poetry. Instead, he stood over Hannah's notebook, the folded note sealed in plastic beside it, and heard Lauren Blake's words from the night before. Do not chase your own assumptions into the woods. Evidence gets ruined that way. People do too. Lauren arrived just after 7 in a state animal control truck splashed with mud up to the doors. She was 39, compact, calm, and dressed in a dark field jacket zipped to the throat, with brown hair tucked beneath a cap, and eyes that seemed to prefer documents to excuses. Sheriff Marcus Reed followed in an older county SUV that sounded as if it had negotiated every hill in Clallam County and forgiven none of them. Marcus was broad-shouldered gray at the mustache, sleepy-looking until he looked directly at something. He did not ask to see the puppies first. Ethan appreciated that. Lauren photographed the note, the tire tracks, the porch boards, the folder Grant had presented in the blue H4 strip. Marcus studied the line of the drive, the place where the SUV had turned the drainage ditch near the cedars. They came in slow, he said. Left faster. Lauren bagged the folder. Harborline's license was revoked after neglect complaints in Oregon. Grant Ellis was listed as a regional director. Luke Rader appears in no official animal rescue capacity. Ethan looked toward the stove corner. Ruby slept with one paw draped across Theo's nose. Theo endured injustice with saintly resignation. Ash breathed. That remained the largest fact. Grace called twice before noon. The first call was medical. Ash had taken a little more formula. Ruby had gained enough weight to become, in Grace's words, a louder legal problem. Theo was stable and emotionally attached to Ranger by proxy. The second call came 5 minutes later and changed the air. A woman named Claire Bennett came by the clinic, Grace said. She saw the van photo Lauren sent around quietly. And, Ethan asked, she works at the ferry office. She says a similar white van was near the lower harbor the night her family's dog disappeared last fall. Local report went nowhere because there were no plates and no proof. Lauren took the phone, asked 3 precise questions, and told Grace to send Claire to the sheriff's office by the back entrance if she was willing to give a statement. Then Lauren looked at Ethan. This is why we do not storm into trees, because a note has feelings. Marcus made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had trusted the room more. By early afternoon, they were in Marcus Reed's small conference room above the sheriff's office, where rain streaked the windows and old coffee haunted the walls. Claire Bennett sat at the end of the table with both hands around a paper cup. She was 34, with auburn hair tied back carelessly and the pale, tired face of someone who had learned to keep moving because a child at home needed dinner whether grief was done or not. Her daughter Emma had been 9 when their German Shepherd mix Max vanished near the ferry terminal. Claire had reported a white van, gray mud on the tires, and a man in a navy jacket who acted as if he had every right to be near the service gate. They told me maybe Max slipped his collar, she said, not accusing Marcus, which somehow made Marcus look older. Maybe he ran. Maybe someone found him and kept him. I wanted one person to say maybe someone took him. Just maybe. Ethan understood the hunger in that word. Maybe could be cruel, but sometimes it was the only door left unlocked. Lauren spread photos on the table. Tire tracks from the clinic, the SUV from Ethan's cabin, the white van, the H4 strip. Claire stared at the strip and her fingers tightened. Blue, what about it? Lauren asked. Claire blinked. At the ferry office, we process cargo manifests for some of the smaller service loads. There were bags marked blue salt, not food, not road salt, at least not the way they were filed. They came through twice always with private kennel transport listed in the notes. Lauren's pen stopped. Marcus leaned forward. You have records. If they have not been purged, I can ask. She looked at Ethan, then almost apologetic for pulling him farther into the thing he had already been pulled into. I kept a picture of the van from our security monitor. It was blurry. Everyone said it was useless. Useless is a word people use when they are tired, Lauren said. Send it." Claire let out a breath that shook Ranger, who had been lying by Ethan's chair, because Grace had agreed to keep the puppies for several hours. And Ranger had chosen duty with visible irritation, rose and walked to Claire. He stopped a yard away and sat, not asking to be touched. Claire looked at him, and for the first time her face opened into something softer than fear. That evening, Lauren set a quiet hook of her own. Not online, not public. Grace passed word through a narrow channel of clinic contacts, old kennel workers and volunteers who knew how to keep their mouths shut when animals were in danger. If the person who wrote the note wanted protection, they could meet behind Monroe Veterinary at 9 near the storage shed by the back fence. No police car out front, no bright lights. No promise that the past would be erased, only enough safety to speak. Ethan hated waiting. Ranger was better at it. The German Shepherd settled beside the puppy box when they returned to the cabin, then followed Ethan room to room, not close enough to soften the silence completely, but close enough that Ethan stopped feeling alone in it. He fed Ash, who swallowed 4 drops before turning his head away with the fragile dignity of a very small old man. Ruby attacked the towel corner. Theo slept against Ranger's foreleg. Ethan wrote the notes. His handwriting looked strange beside Hannah's, less graceful, more like fence posts. Still it held. At 8:35, Ethan parked 2 blocks from the clinic and walked the alley with Ranger at heel. The night smelled of wet asphalt, harbor saltfish scales from the processing plant down the hill, and cedar smoke from houses tucked against the slope. The storage shed behind the clinic sat between stacked feed pallets and a chain-link fence glazed with rain. Lauren waited inside with the lights off. Marcus stood somewhere outside where Ethan could not see him, which meant Marcus knew his job. Claire had asked to help and been told no by 3 people in different tones. Ryan Price had arrived anyway with a medical bag and a thermos because former combat medics apparently considered danger a scheduling suggestion. He was 38 rounder at the shoulders than he had been when Ethan last saw him, wearing a rust-colored rescue jacket and a grin he used the way other men used a flashlight. "For the record," Ryan whispered, "I preferred your retirement when it involved fewer secret meetings by trash bins." "You came," Ethan said. "Complaining is part of my service package." They waited 22 minutes. Then Ranger lifted his head not toward the alley but toward the narrow gap behind the feed pallets. A woman stepped out of the dark as if she had been folded into it. Late 20s, thin from stress hair, dark blonde and uneven at her shoulders. Brown canvas jacket hanging loose jeans wet to the knees. Her hands were red, cracked and scrubbed raw. The hands of someone who had washed floors in cold water and kept washing after they were clean. She saw Ranger first and stopped. "That's him," she whispered. Ethan did not move. Lauren kept her voice low. "Your name?" The woman swallowed. "Paige Carter." Her eyes went from Lauren to Ethan and away. "I left the puppies." The shed seemed to shrink around the sentence. Ranger stood calm and watchful. Paige's face crumpled for 1 second before she forced it still. "I didn't know where else to take them. I swear I didn't." Lauren opened her notebook. "Where did they come from?" Paige's mouth shaped the answer, but before she could say it, Ranger's ears snapped toward the back fence. Ethan heard it a breath later, a faint scrape, metal against wood. Someone waiting at the route he would have chosen if Ranger had not warned them. Lauren saw Ethan's face change. Marcus's radio clicked once outside, low and sharp. Ryan's humor vanished like a light blown out. Paige froze so completely she seemed carved from rain. Ranger stepped across Ethan's knee and blocked the path behind the pallets, every muscle set. In the alley beyond the shed, a beam of light swept once across wet boards, slow and searching. Ethan had promised Lauren he would not improvise, but promises made in daylight were now standing in the dark, with a frightened witness between them and men who had already found her trail. He lowered his hand to Ranger's harness and whispered, "Show me the other way." Ranger turned not toward the obvious exit, but toward the drainage gap beneath the side fence, where cold water ran through leaves and black mud. Ethan looked at Lauren. She gave one hard nod. Paige whispered, "They're here." And from the alley a man's voice said softly, "Paige, don't make this worse." The rain behind Monroe Veterinary had turned the alley into a narrow black mirror, and every light in it looked broken. From beyond the feed pallets came the man's voice again, soft enough to be mistaken for patience by someone who had not heard a threat wear good shoes. "Paige, come on. Nobody needs to get hurt." Paige Carter's breath hitched hard. Ethan felt the sound move through the small shed like a hand striking glass. Lauren Blake did not raise her voice. She pointed 2 fingers toward the drainage gap, then toward Marcus Reed's shadow moving beyond the fence line. Ryan Price opened the side door only enough to let the wet smell in. Ranger had already made his choice. The German Shepherd angled his body between Paige and the alley, head low, silent, not challenging, not retreating. Ethan touched the harness not to restrain him, just to let the dog know he had understood. They moved low and ugly, which was usually how people survived. Paige went first through the drainage gap, knees in cold mud, canvas jacket scraping wire. Lauren followed with one hand on Paige's elbow and the other near her radio. Ethan came next, shoulder striking the fence post hard enough to send a bright flare through his ribs. Ranger slipped through after him with the insulting grace of a creature built closer to the ground. Ryan stayed long enough to shove a loose pallet across the obvious path, then joined them with his medical bag tucked under one arm. A flashlight sliced through the shed a second after they cleared it. "Backside," a man hissed. Marcus's voice boomed from the alley, suddenly broad as a door. "Sheriff's office. Hands where I can see them." Feet ran on wet gravel. 1 set, maybe 2. Ethan's body calculated angles without permission. He saw the service lane, the fence corner, the old lumberyard beyond every line turning into action inside his muscles. Ranger glanced up at him. "Hold," the dog's eyes seemed to say. Ethan held. A young man in a black jacket tried to vault the fence near the lumberyard and misjudged the slick top rail. He came down badly, one boot sliding in mud, arms windmilling without dignity. Marcus and a deputy had him cuffed in less than a minute. The second shadow escaped toward the lower street. Ethan did not chase. It cost him. The cost sat in his teeth. Lauren took the young man's phone while he protested that he was just giving someone a ride. The screen lit again and again under the rain. "Luke Rader. Bring her back before she says Harbor 4. Paige saw the name and folded inward, not fainting but close enough that Ryan moved fast. "Sit before gravity files paperwork," he said, easing her down onto an overturned crate beneath the awning. Paige laughed once, a broken breath that seemed to surprise her. Then she covered her mouth with both hands. They took Paige to the sheriff's office by the rear entrance. No flashing lights, no small-town audience. Inside the interview room, the overhead bulbs hummed and rain tapped the window. Paige sat wrapped in a county blanket, a paper cup of coffee cooling untouched between her hands. Her face looked younger in the flat light, almost girlish for 1 second, then older than 27 the next. Lauren turned on the recorder and stated the time. Marcus stood near the wall, arms crossed. Ethan sat only because Lauren had pointed to a chair with the expression of a woman who would not ask twice. Ranger lay between Ethan and the door. Paige kept looking at him, not because he comforted her exactly, but because he did not demand forgiveness. That made him safer than people. "Start with the name," Lauren said. Paige swallowed. Olympic Shore Working Dogs. It is outside town, West Road, past the old quarry spur. They advertise training, boarding, recovery, security dogs, ranch dogs, private clients. Who runs it? Grant Ellis handles clients and paperwork. Luke Rader handles transport and discipline. Her mouth twisted. They call him kennel manager. He likes locks more than dogs. The sentence pressed into Ethan's chest. The mother... Paige looked at him then. Really looked. Her file number was W19. I called her Willow when no one could hear. German Shepherd, sable coat, dark face, one ear torn at the edge, little white mark on her back left paw. She had the pups early during the freezing rain. They were too small. Luke said the weak ones moved cleaner because small carriers are easier to hide. Grant said nobody asks questions about puppies if the jacket looks official. Marcus shifted against the wall. Lauren's pen moved without sound. Moved where? Paige stared at the coffee. I don't know all of it. I heard Harbor 4, Cold Dock, Blue Salt. I thought they were inventory terms at first. Bags in the feed shed, blueprint on them, not feed. Envelopes wrapped in plastic, sometimes collars, sometimes tags, sometimes records. Dogs would disappear after those bags moved. Lauren let the silence do its work. It was not kindness, but it was honest. Why didn't you report it earlier? Paige closed her eyes. Because I needed the job. Because my mother needed medicine. Because Grant said the dogs were transfers. Because Luke said people like me get charged too if paperwork goes missing. Because I told myself clean water and fresh bedding still mattered if I stayed. Her voice broke on the last word. And because every week I moved the line just one more day. Just until I knew more, just until someone worse than me did something I could call proof. No one rescued her from the answer. Ethan respected Lauren for that. Paige opened her eyes again. Willow would not let me near the pups at first. Then the storm knocked power out in the back row. I found Luke loading 2 carriers. I heard him say Harbor 4 was taking the early litter. I panicked. I took the 3 he had already separated, put them in a crate from the tool shed and drove. Why my cabin? Ethan asked. Paige looked at the table. Hannah Hayes. The name changed the room quietly but completely. I used to bring strays to the clinic when I was younger. Once I had no money and a dog with a cut paw. Dr. Monroe called your wife. Hannah met me behind the church with towels, food, and a list of phone numbers. She said if weather turned bad and I had nowhere else, the cabin at Freshwater always had a porch light. Paige's eyes filled. I saw Ranger once. I remembered him. I thought if the dog was still there, maybe he would hear them. Ethan had no answer. The truth was too large for quick words. Ranger lifted his head at Hannah's name, then laid it down again beside Ethan's boot. Paige wiped her face with the heel of her hand. I left them in the rain because I was scared Grant would track me. I thought the roof would cover the crate. I thought I would come back with help. Then I saw the van near the clinic and knew they had followed me. Lauren asked about trackers. Paige nodded miserably. They put one under my car. I found it yesterday behind the car wash on Pike Street. But before that, I drove everywhere with it. The clinic, the ferry lot, near Ethan's road. Marcus looked at Lauren. They let her run. Lauren's mouth tightened. To see who she led them to. Ryan muttered something uncharitable into his coffee. Ethan heard enough to agree. By midnight, Paige had given every location she knew, every name she remembered, every shift pattern, every door that stuck, every dog she had secretly named. She was late. She had been afraid. She had also come. Ethan could hold both truths in the same room because grief had taught him that simple verdicts were for people standing far away. Near 2 in the morning, Lauren stepped into the hall with Marcus and Ethan. Ranger followed and sat close enough that his shoulder brushed Ethan's leg. It was the first clear lean since Ethan had come home. Small contact, heavy meaning. Lauren kept her voice low. I can move for an administrative hold and welfare check by morning. A full warrant will depend on what Grace documents and what we pull from Claire's ferry records. Marcus rubbed his mustache. If they believe Paige talk, they may move dogs before sunrise. Ethan looked toward the interview room window where Paige sat under a county blanket staring at nothing. He wanted motion so badly his hands felt cold without rain on them. Lauren saw it. You are not going alone. I know. Say it in a way that convinces both of us. Ethan looked down at Ranger, then back at her. I am not going alone. His phone buzzed before Lauren could answer. Unknown number. A photo appeared first, a sable German shepherd behind bars, head lowered, one torn ear visible. Then came the message. Last chance, Hayes. Give us the pups or Willow goes to Harbor 4 at dawn. The photograph on Ethan's phone seemed to pull all the warmth out of the sheriff's hallway. Outside Port Angeles slept under a misty rain, streetlights floating in the windows like tired moons. Inside, Lauren Blake took the phone from Ethan with gloved hands, snapped a picture of the screen, then sealed the device in an evidence bag only after transferring what she needed. The sable German shepherd in the photo stood behind kennel bars with her head lowered and one torn ear ragged against the poor light. Her left back paw showed a small white mark. Willow. The message sat beneath her like a blade laid on a table. Last chance, Hayes. Give us the pups or Willow goes to Harbor 4 at dawn. Ethan did not speak. Speaking would have let anger choose the shape of him. Ranger stood against his leg. Rigid nose lifted toward the phone as if the smell of the threat could pass through glass. By sunrise, the rain had thinned to a cold veil over the West Road. Olympic Shore working dog sat beyond a chain gate near the old quarry spur where second-growth forest crowded the shoulder and puddles filled tire ruts deep enough to hide bad decisions. The sign at the entrance showed a proud black shepherd silhouette beside the words Training Boarding Recovery. One corner of the sign had peeled under weather, curling the painted muzzle into something that looked almost like a snarl. Lauren had moved fast. Grace's medical report, Paige's statement, Claire's ferry records, the false harbor line paperwork. The H4 strip and the threat photo together gave the court enough to sign what Lauren needed. Marcus Reed arrived with 2 deputies. Grace had sent a partner vet tech team with crates, blankets, and quiet hands. Ryan Price came with a medical kit and a thermos big enough to suggest belief in emergencies lasting all day. Ethan came with Ranger because Paige had described terrain and dog behavior that might matter. Lauren had made the boundary clear in the parking lot before they left town. You are not law enforcement. You do not detain, threaten, enter uncleared rooms, or become a headline. Ryan raised one hand. Can he become a footnote? Lauren looked at him. Do not encourage him. Ethan said, I can identify road sightlines, dogs under stress, and places a man would run if he thought he was clever. Lauren studied him. That sounds dangerously useful. Stay useful. They parked before the gate while fog snagged in the fir branches. Marcus stepped forward with the warrant voice carrying through the wet morning. Sheriff's Office. State Animal Control. We have a warrant. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then a curtain twitched in the low office building. A chair scraped. Someone cursed. The gate chain rattled as a deputy cut the lock. Grant Ellis came out of the office wearing a navy jacket over a clean gray shirt, his hair combed, his face arranged into injured dignity. He looked less polished in daylight. Tired under the eyes, meaner around the mouth. There has been a misunderstanding, he called. We are a licensed facility. Lauren held up the warrant. You can explain that after the premises are secure. Where is Paige? Grant asked. Safe, Marcus said. That answer did not please him. Behind the second kennel building, a door slammed. Lauren's radio clicked. Movement east side. Male running toward the quarry trail. Ethan felt the old world rise fast in his muscles. Angle, distance, mud, the way the trail narrowed at the culvert. Ranger tensed, ready for any command. Ethan kept his hand flat on the harness. "Hold," he whispered. Ranger held. 30 seconds later, a deputy's voice came through the radio. "Subject stopped. One in custody." Ryan exhaled. "Bad footwear claims another dream." The first kennel door opened and sound came out wrong. Not the healthy chaos of dogs seeing visitors, not full barking. Broken sound, one dog throwing itself against chain link, another whining low, several scrabbling backward from light. The smell came after it, layered and sour, beneath thin disinfectant, damp bedding stress, cheap feed, metal bowls, stale water. Fear trying to pass inspection. Ethan stopped at the threshold. Ranger stopped too. The dog did not bark. His ears went back and his body lowered, not in submission but in careful reduction. A large animal making himself less sharp for frightened ones. Lauren's team moved slowly, photographing before touching, calling kennel numbers, documenting bowls, bedding injuries, tags. Grace's tech slid blankets over crate floors. Marcus kept Grant near the office while deputies cleared rooms one by one. Luke Rader was the man who had tried to run. His jacket was muddy now, one cheek scraped where the trail had corrected his confidence. Ethan did not look at him for long. There were dogs to look at. The first row held 2 shepherd mixes, a lean Malinois with ribs showing, and a black dog so silent its stillness seemed heavier than barking. Some doors had blank tags. Others had numbers. A11, C6, W19 should have been one of them, Paige had said. But the first row ended without Willow. A young German shepherd slammed backward when a rescue officer approached with a slip lead. Ranger lowered himself to the floor before anyone asked. He turned his head slightly aside and yawned, slow, deliberate, a calming signal Hannah had once taught Ethan to notice by whacking his arm with a dish towel whenever he missed it. The young dog froze, the bark caught in its throat and changed shape. Fear did not vanish. Fear was not a light switch, but it paused long enough for the officer to wait instead of force, and sometimes waiting was the door. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Ranger had refused Ethan's hand for nearly a year. But here he gave peace to strangers without asking them for a reason. In the feed room, Lauren found the first blue bags. They were stacked behind ordinary kibble printed with the words "Blue Salt" in block letters, and a Wave logo that did not belong to any brand Ethan knew. Lauren sliced one open on a clean tarp. No salt poured out. Inside were plastic-wrapped envelopes, collars, veterinary forms, and small photo sheets. Claire's ferry note had been right. Ryan stood in the doorway and whispered, "I hate being right when it makes me nauseous." Lauren did not answer. Her face had gone still in the way Ethan had learned to respect. She called for evidence bags, then opened a folder where the same code appeared over and over, H4. Harbor 4. The characters matched the blue strip from the Puppies crate. Ethan saw it upside down and felt the cabin porch return around him. Rain crate, frozen bodies, Ranger's low warning. "Later," Lauren said without looking at him. "Willow first." He nodded because if he spoke, anger might waste time. They found 2 nursing females in the second kennel building, but neither was Willow. One was 2 young eyes bright with panic. The other had both ears intact and no white mark. Paige, waiting in a county vehicle under protection, had drawn a rough map of the facility. Back row, she had written. Coldest row. Drain by the wall. Luke keeps the dogs he does not want clients seeing. Ethan moved only when Lauren gave permission. Ranger walked beside him down a narrow hall where one overhead bulb flickered and water collected near the drain. The air changed there. Not colder in any measurable way, but the body knew. Some rooms carried what had happened inside them. Ranger stopped at the corner. He looked back at Ethan once, then stepped into the last row. There were 4 kennels, 2 empty. One held a brown dog curled tight in the back, eyes open, body making itself small around exhaustion. The last kennel seemed empty until the shadow near the wall lifted its head. Willow was smaller than Ethan expected, not weak. That was different. She was thin and spent, sable coat dull from stress, torn ear rough at the edge, eyes hard enough to stop a careless person at the door. Her left back paw shifted and there was the white mark. She stood over an empty patch of bedding, guarding the absence where her puppies should have been. No one moved toward the latch. Ethan lowered himself slowly to the wet concrete outside the bars. Ranger came down beside him, shoulder nearly touching his knee. Willow's eyes fixed on Ethan. There was no pleading in them. Pleading belonged to creatures who believed asking might work. Willow looked at him with the exhausted refusal of a mother who had lost everything and still had one job left. "Willow," Ethan said softly. Her ears moved. Ranger made a low sound from deep in his chest, steady and gentle, less a whine than a vibration of recognition. Willow's gaze shifted to him. Ethan kept his hands on his knees where she could see them. "They're alive. Ash, Ruby, and Theo. Ruby is trouble. Theo thinks Ranger belongs to him. Ash is small, but he is still here." Behind him, Ryan whispered, "That is a medically accurate report." Lauren shot him a look. Even Ethan almost smiled. Willow took one step toward the door, then stopped, body trembling with effort and distrust. Ranger lowered his head to his paws. That did it. Not magically. Not all at once. Nothing living heals on command. Willow took another step, then another until her nose touched the lower bar. The rescue officer beside Lauren opened the latch with hands so slow they seemed to move through water. Willow stepped out. Ethan did not touch her. He only moved back to give her room. As they guided her toward the crate, Willow turned once to the empty patch of bedding. Ethan understood enough to hurt. "You will see them," he said. Outside, a deputy shouted from the office and Lauren's radio burst with new urgency. Grant's records showed 3 dogs already scheduled for Coal Dock that night. The afternoon over Port Angeles sank into a wet pewter light, and the trees around Olympic Shore working dogs dripped steadily as if the forest were trying to wash the place from its memory. By 4 o'clock, every dog in the main kennel had been photographed, examined, logged, and loaded into warmed vehicles. Grant Ellis sat cuffed in the back of a county SUV with his polished face turned toward the window. Luke Rader sat in another, muddy and silent, no longer smelling like authority, only like wet wool, old oil, and failed plans. Ethan did not watch them for long. There were better uses for his eyes. Willow's crate had been placed in Grace Monroe's transport van, insulated with blankets and kept dim. The mother German shepherd had allowed no one to touch her unless absolutely necessary. That was fine. Ethan had come to understand that trust was not a coin people earned quickly because they wanted it. The drive back to Monroe Veterinary felt longer than the drive out. Ranger rode in the front passenger seat this time, an active decision so obvious Ethan chose not to comment on it. The dog stared forward through the rain-muddy paws on the mat harness, dark against his black and tan coat. Every few minutes he turned his head toward the van ahead where Willow rode behind fogged windows. Ethan followed the taillights through town past the damp hardware store, the shuttered bait shop, the ferry office where Claire Bennett stood under the awning holding a folder to her chest. She watched the convoy pass with her jaw tight. Hope, Ethan thought, could look almost exactly like fear when it had been disappointed often enough. At the clinic, Grace took command before engines had cooled. No crowding, no sentimental stampede, no one says reunion in a voice that makes me want to throw a clipboard. Ryan lifted one hand. Our gentle sobs permitted, only if useful. Then no. Willow went first into the dim treatment room. Grace examined her with the patient firmness of someone who respected teeth. The dog was dehydrated, underweight, raw along one hip, and milk-heavy with no puppies to nurse. She stood through the exam because lying down required trust she did not have left to spend. Ranger waited in the hall with Ethan, not whining, not pacing, but vibrating with stillness. The puppies slept in a warmed basket nearby. Ruby woke and declared herself offended by doors. Theo answered with a squeak. Ash lifted his head only halfway, but he lifted it. Ethan knelt beside the basket and whispered, "Not yet. Soon." He did not know if the words were for them, for Willow, or for himself. Grace opened the treatment room door after nearly an hour. Her eyes were tired and red at the edges, though she had the pride not to admit either. "Quiet, one at a time. Ranger last." Ethan followed instructions because the alternative involved Grace and possibly surgical instruments. Lauren stood near the wall with her notebook closed. Marcus waited in the hall. Ryan leaned against the door frame, pretending he was fascinated by the ceiling tile. The room was warm, low-lit, and smelled of clean towels, saline, and milk. Willow lay on a thick blanket now, still braced, still watching every hand. Grace carried the puppy basket to the edge of the blanket and folded back the towel. Ruby cried first, furious and bright. Willow's body changed so quickly that every person in the room stopped breathing. Theo squeaked. Ash's small head rose with great effort, as if that sound had pulled him upward by a thread. Willow stared into the basket. Then she crawled forward. It was not graceful. Her legs trembled and one paw slipped on the blanket. Grace moved 1 inch and stopped when Willow's eyes cut to her. The dog lowered her nose to Ruby first. Ruby shoved her whole face upward as if scolding her mother for tardiness. Willow touched Theo, then Ash. The sound she made was almost nothing, a broken breath drawn from the bottom of a body that had held grief too tightly. Ethan stepped back until his shoulder met the wall. This was not his moment. It belonged to a mother and 3 small lives who had stayed alive long enough to be found by each other. Ranger entered last. He stopped just inside the door, head low, eyes sought in the way Ethan had almost forgotten. Willow looked at him. Ranger turned his body slightly sideways. No challenge, no claim. After a long minute, Willow rested her chin around the puppies. The room exhaled. For a while, no one spoke. Grace adjusted the heat lamp. Lauren wrote 1 note and then stopped, as if even documentation could wait 10 seconds. Ryan wiped his nose and said too casually, "Allergies." Marcus said, "To what?" "Dignity, apparently." Ethan looked down because a laugh had tried to rise through something wet and painful in his chest. Then Ranger moved beside him. A warm muzzle touched the back of Ethan's hand, light as a question. Ethan did not close his fingers too quickly. He let the contact be what it was, not forgiveness, not absolution. A test of the floorboards. Ranger kept his muzzle there for 2 breaths, then stepped closer to Willow's blanket and lay down near the door. Guarding, always guarding. But the line of his body no longer excluded Ethan from the room. The victory lasted exactly until Lauren opened the second records box from Olympic Shore. It was past dusk by then, and the clinic lobby had become a temporary command post. Wet jackets hung from chairbacks. Evidence bags lay in neat rows. Grace's receptionist had gone home after being instructed to forget every name she heard unless asked under oath. A responsibility she accepted with visible delight. Paige Carter sat beside the coffee machine, wrapped in another blanket, watching the treatment room door as if Willow might accuse her by existing. Claire arrived with ferry records on a flash drive and a printed manifest that showed blue salt cargo marked for private transfer 3 times in 5 months. Her hand shook when she gave it to Lauren, but she did not pull it back. "Max vanished the night of the second one," she said. I don't know if it helps. Lauren took the papers gently. It helps. The records from Olympic Shore did not help in any merciful way. They widened the wound. 19 dogs had been listed on property in the previous month. 12 were recovered at the kennel. Willow made 13. 3 had paperwork claiming transfer to licensed rescues that did not exist. 3 more were marked in a different column beside H4, Blue Salt, and Cold Dock. The receiving signatures were false flat repeated. Natalie Cross arrived at 820 Federal badge at her belt, black haircut just below her jaw, and one narrow silver streak by her temple. She looked like a practical knife in a charcoal jacket. Lauren greeted her with one word. Natalie. Natalie set a tablet on the counter. This is bigger than a bad kennel. Paige made a small sound. Natalie glanced at her, then at Ethan, then Ranger, measuring the room without wasting expression. Harbor 4 is a route. Cold Dock is likely the old industrial pier below Edith's Hook. Blue Salt is a document carrier. Someone uses animal rescue paperwork to move dogs across state lines. Claire closed her eyes. Paige whispered, I saw the bags. Lauren turned. How many? Paige rubbed her cracked hands together. 5 or 6 at a time. Luke kept them behind the feed. Sometimes he said they were going to the coast, sometimes the valley. I thought if I did not touch them, I was not part of it. The words landed hard because everyone in the room knew that was exactly how bad systems survived, by convincing decent, frightened people that looking away was a kind of neutrality. Ethan thought of the night Hannah died, of every clean phrase that had explained why he was not beside her. Weather delay, command need, operational necessity. Clean words could still leave a person with dirty hands. He looked through the treatment room glass where Willow slept around her pups, Ruby tucked under her chin, Theo mashed against her front leg. Ash breathing in the small hollow between them. Natalie pulled up a map on the tablet. Old service roads, Lower Harbor, the abandoned coal dock, the ferry access lanes, the route past the paper mill. Claire leaned closer, then pointed to a side gate near the port fence. That is where the van was in October. Her voice shook, but the finger did not. It did not go through the public booth. It used the maintenance lane. Marcus frowned. That gate should have a camera. It does, Claire said, but the angle is bad unless a vehicle turns wide. Natalie looked at her. Can you get that footage? If the archive still has it, yes. Ryan looked at Ethan. I think your quiet retirement has developed chapters. Ethan did not answer. Ranger had risen and stood between him and the treatment room, as if the dog understood that more dogs were still out there beyond the rain. Natalie tapped Cold Dock on the map. If the schedule holds, the next movement is before dawn. Lauren's eyes met Ethan's. He already knew what she would say. Boundaries. Roles. No heroics. This time he nodded before she spoke, but his gaze stayed on the map where the old pier reached into black water like a finger pointing at a secret. Night over Port Angeles had a wet shine to it, the kind that made every street lamp look doubled and every road seem deeper than it was. The sheriff's office conference room glowed above the sleeping town, while rain ran down the windows in thin, crooked lines. Maps covered the table, ferry records, kennel files, photos from Ethan's porch. Still frames from Monroe Veterinary. Blue Salt manifests that had been printed, copied, and highlighted until the paper began to curl at the edges. Natalie Cross stood at the head of the table with her sleeves pushed back, one hand on the map of the Lower Harbor. Lauren Blake sat to her right with 3 evidence folders open and a paper cup of coffee she had not touched. Marcus Reed leaned against the wall, arms crossed, looking less sleepy by the minute. Ethan stood near the window with Ranger at his side. The dog had chosen the strip of floor between Ethan and the door. No one asked him to move. Natalie tapped the map. Cold Dock is abandoned officially. Unofficially, it still has road access from the old mill lane, a usable loading apron, and enough cover from the port fence to hide a small transfer. Harbor 4 appears in 4 separate records, the strip from the crate. The kennel documents the text threat, and the blue salt manifests. That is not random. Ryan Price, who had arrived with sandwiches no one remembered asking for, squinted at the lines. A secret code named after a harbor and a number. I was hoping criminals would be less committed to branding. Branding is how sloppy people feel organized, Natalie said. It also gives us pattern. Claire Bennett sat near the end of the table with her laptop open, sleeves damp from running between the ferry office and her car. She had found archived footage from the maintenance gate, not crisp, not pretty, but enough. A white van turning wide, a navy jacket, a dog shape in the rear when the interior light flickered. The date matched the night Max disappeared. Claire did not cry when she saw it. That would have been easier for the room to understand. Instead, she went very still. Her daughter Emma had drawn pictures of Max for weeks after he vanished, always with the same red collar and one ear flopped wrong because Emma liked mistakes that made things recognizable. Claire had been told dogs wander, gates fail, people imagine patterns when grief needs a target. Now the pattern sat on a screen, gray and grainy, refusing to be comfort. Ethan watched her hand close around the edge of the laptop. Ranger noticed too. He left Ethan's side and walked to her chair, stopping at the same respectful distance as before. Claire lowered one hand, not touching him, just letting her fingers hang in the air where a dog could decide. Ranger sniffed once and sat. Claire breathed out. I don't know if Max is alive. Natalie looked at the footage. We do not know yet. It was not kindness dressed up as certainty. Claire nodded as if that honesty was the first steady thing anyone had given her. Paige Carter sat across from Claire, smaller inside a borrowed sweatshirt. Her cracked hands folded so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had slept less than anyone except perhaps Ethan, who had stopped pretending he knew what sleep was for. The blue salt bags moved with the dogs, Paige said. Luke told us not to touch them. Grant said it was donor paperwork, adoption records, medical transfers. I believed what let me keep showing up. Lauren did not soften the question. Did you see money? Paige closed her eyes. Once. Plastic-wrapped envelopes, cash, a list with initials. I only saw it because a bag split. Luke came in and I said I was sweeping. Did he believe you? No. She opened her eyes. That is when he started putting the tracker on my car. Marcus wrote something on a yellow pad. Ryan pushed a sandwich toward Paige. Eat half. You can be morally devastated after protein. She stared at him, then took a bite, because exhaustion sometimes obeyed nonsense better than sympathy. Ethan studied the harbor map until the lines arranged themselves into ground he knew. He had worked maintenance contracts near the old mill years ago, before his last deployment, when Hannah was still strong enough to insist that married men should own tools for reasons beyond emotional avoidance. The mill lane sloped toward Coal Dock, but a culvert near the second bend washed out after heavy rain. A loaded truck trying to leave fast would choose the higher apron, then bog at the left shoulder if it cut too wide. There was a service footpath along the fence, hidden from the main road by blackberry brambles and rusted chain link. The wind came off the water from the northeast before dawn, which meant dogs inside the warehouse could smell people approaching from the wrong side. Ethan explained only the parts Natalie asked for. He did not make speeches. He did not volunteer to save the world. Once he would have heard the old urgency in his blood and called it clarity. Now he felt Ranger's shoulder against his calf and recognized urgency as a tool that could still cut the person holding it. Natalie listened without interrupting, then drew a boundary on the map with a red marker. You and Ranger stay here behind the cedar windfall above the service road. You identify movement toward the culvert and notify by radio. You do not enter the warehouse until I clear it. You do not detain anyone. You do not follow anyone who runs past your boundary. If I hear improvisation in your voice, I will remove you from my mourning and from my patience." Ryan raised his coffee. "That last part is federal." Ethan looked at Ranger. The dog looked back with an expression Hannah would have called brutally sane. "Understood," Ethan said. Natalie watched him 1 second longer. "Try saying it like a man who understands his dog outranks his ego." This time Marcus did laugh very quietly. Ethan felt the corner of his mouth move. "Understood." The operation took shape in fragments. Marcus's deputies would block the mill lane and the lower service road. Natalie would bring federal agents through the port side. Lauren would stay with the animal control team and evidence collection. Ryan would stage with crates, blankets, fluids, and 2 veterinary technicians Grace bullied into volunteering with a tone that suggested saying no would harm their future access to coffee. Claire would stay at the sheriff's office feeding updates from ferry archives and port access logs. She argued for exactly 90 seconds before Emma called asking if she was coming home. And the sound of her daughter's sleepy voice decided the matter more effectively than any badge could. Paige would remain under guard. Before they took her from the room, she looked at Ethan. "If Willow hates me, she should." Ethan could have offered comfort. He did not trust comfort that erased the work. "She may never know what you did right," he said. "Do it anyway." Paige nodded and the movement looked painful. Before dawn, Ethan stopped at Monroe Veterinary. Grace was in the treatment room wearing a fleece vest under her clinic coat hair. Pinned badly, eyes sharp enough to cut tape. Willow lay curled around Ash, Ruby, and Theo. The pups had latched for brief supervised feedings through the night, and Ash looked less like smoke than he had before. Not strong, present, that mattered. Ranger stood at the glass door, ears forward. He did not scratch, he did not whine. He simply watched. Grace came out and handed Ethan a packet. "Extra gloves, gauze, emergency blanket, and a list of things you are not allowed to do." That list fit on paper. I used small print. Her face changed by half an inch. "Bring him back." Ethan looked at Ranger. "I plan to." Planning. A charming development. She turned away before emotion could make her rude in a less comfortable way. Coal Dock waited under fog. The old pier stretched into dark water below Eddy's Hook, like a black ribboard slick with algae and warnings ignored long enough to rust into decoration. Beyond it sat a warehouse with a collapsed corner, a cold storage shed, and a fenced yard where grass grew through gravel. The air smelled of salt diesel, wet rope, and low tide. Ethan crouched behind a fallen cedar above the service road with Ranger beside him. Or rather, Ranger settled himself and allowed Ethan to crouch nearby. Through binoculars, Ethan saw a white box truck idling beside the warehouse. A dark pickup sat near the loading apron. Men moved in and out of fog carrying blue salt bags with both arms too carefully for cargo that was supposed to be cheap mineral feed. Then Ranger's ears shifted. Ethan heard it after him. A low whine from inside the warehouse. "Not many dogs." "Enough." Natalie's voice came through the radio, calm and clipped. "Hold!" The truck driver climbed into the cab. Another man reached for the warehouse door. Ethan felt Ranger wanting to rise. He wanted it too. The fog thickened around the dock, swallowing the men to gray shapes. Natalie waited one breath longer, and that breath felt like the longest bridge Ethan had ever crossed. Fog wrapped Coal Dock so tightly that the warehouse, the pier, and the water beyond it seemed to belong to separate worlds. The old boards sweated under the cold before sunrise, and the warning signs along the fence hung crooked orange rust bleeding down their bolts. Ethan Hayes crouched behind the fallen cedar above the service road with rain soaking into the knees of his jeans, and Ranger pressed low beside him. The German shepherd's ears stayed fixed on the warehouse. Somewhere inside, a dog whined again, then stopped as if the sound had been swallowed by a hand. Ethan's grip tightened around the radio. He did not move. Natalie Cross's order still lived in his ear. Hold. The truck driver in the white box truck reached toward the gear shift. A man near the loading door turned his head toward the water, impatient. Blue salt bags sat stacked under a tarp, their printed waves ghostly in the fog. Natalie's voice cut through the dock on a cruiser speaker, calm enough to be more frightening than a shout. "Federal agents, sheriff's office, turn off the engine and show your hands." For 1 second, the dock froze. Then reality broke into motion. Not the clean, dramatic kind people imagine from television. The real thing was messy and wet. A man slipped on algae before he could decide whether to run. Another lifted both hands so fast he dropped a clipboard into a puddle. The truck lurched forward, engine growling, tires biting gravel. Ethan saw the driver choose the mill lane exactly as expected. He saw the left wheels drift toward the softened shoulder near the culvert where heavy rain had eaten the road from underneath. "Truck moving," Ethan said into the radio. "Mill lane, left shoulder is soft, he is going to bog." The box truck made it 40 yards before the rear tires sank with a wet, sucking crunch. A county unit blocked the lane ahead. Deputies moved in from both sides with measured speed. Ranger stayed down, but Ethan felt the tremor through the leash. The dog wanted the warehouse. So did Ethan. Wanting was not permission. On the loading apron, one man grabbed a blue salt bag and tried to drag it back inside as if paperwork could be hidden after a dozen badges had watched him touch it. Marcus Reed's voice rolled from the fog. "Leave it." The man left it. Another bolted toward the pier with a phone in his hand. He drew his arm back to throw it into the harbor. His boot hit a slick board. He went down hard, phone skittering away and stopping against a rusted cleat. Ryan's voice crackled over the radio from the medical staging area. "I would like the record to show infrastructure assisted." Nobody laughed then. There was too much work inside the next breath. Natalie secured the phone. Marcus's deputies cleared the apron. Lauren and the animal control officers waited until every human hand had been accounted for before moving toward the warehouse. When Natalie gave the nod, Ethan entered with Ranger. The warehouse smelled of salt-rot diesel, wet wood, old rope, cheap disinfectant, and fear. The sound of dogs came from the back wall, muffled beneath tarps. 4 transport crates sat between stacked pallets and rusted equipment. Inside were 2 German shepherds, one Malinois and an older shepherd mixed with white around the muzzle and a red collar so faded it looked pink at the edges. They were frightened, thirsty, and alive. Alive was not enough. Alive was everything. Ranger walked to the crates and lowered himself to the concrete without being asked. He turned his head slightly away, yawned once, then rested his chin on his paws. The Malinois stopped clawing first. One shepherd kept barking in sharp, broken bursts, but the barks grew farther apart. The old shepherd mix watched Ranger, then sank down with a sigh so tired it seemed to loosen the whole building. Ethan knelt near the closest crate while an officer checked the latch. He kept his hands visible and his body angled aside. "No hurry," he said, though hurry lived under his skin. "We have time now." He thought of Willow guarding an empty blanket. He thought of Ash swallowing one drop at a time. He thought of Ranger lying at Hannah's door, refusing to come close because grief had built a wall neither man nor dog had known how to climb. Now Ranger lay in a warehouse full of strangers, giving calm to dogs who had no reason left to trust any room made by people. Ethan had believed coming home meant facing everything he had failed to save. He was beginning to understand that returning could also mean finding what was still within reach. Lauren cut open one of the blue salt bags on a clean tarp after photographing it from 4 angles. Inside were sealed envelopes, veterinary forms with altered dates, adoption certificates, small metal tags, photographs, and plastic sleeves of cash. Natalie laid each item into evidence rows with efficient hands. "Multiple states," she said. Lauren pulled a transfer sheet from the stack. "Buyers, brokers, relay drivers." Marcus stood near the warehouse door, rain silvering his jacket shoulders. "How many dogs?" Natalie did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. Claire's voice came through Lauren's phone from the sheriff's office, thin with exhaustion. "The old collar in the crate, the red one, can someone check it for a brass tag?" Lauren looked toward Ethan. The older shepherd mix had turned its head, one clouded eye, watching Ranger. An animal control officer opened the crate slowly. The red collar did have a tag scratched and dirty, not Max, but the phone number was from the same area where Claire's missing report had been filed. Ethan carried the number to Lauren, and Lauren sent it to Claire. The silence on the phone stretched. "It is not him," Claire said finally. Her voice did not break, which made it worse. "But it is someone like him." Natalie spoke gently for the first time that morning. "Someone may be looking." "Then find them," Claire said. "Please." The word was quiet, not weak. By mid-morning, Coal Dock was secured. The dogs were loaded into warmed vehicles. The blue salt bags were evidence. Phones, tablets, false paperwork, and cash were tagged. The box truck sat tilted near the culvert, humbled by mud and bad judgment. Ryan worked beside the transport team, checking gums, giving water, making one of the vet techs laugh by telling a trembling shepherd that the county had nicer blankets than most hotels but worse room service. The laugh mattered. Small human sounds mattered when a place had held too much fear. As the fog lifted, the harbor appeared in pieces, gray water, rusted pier gulls wheeling over the port buildings, the long curve of land toward a Diz Hook. Ethan stood near the fence with Ranger beside him. The dog was wet, muddy, and tired. He leaned lightly against Ethan's leg, so lightly a proud dog could deny it if challenged. Ethan did not challenge. Marcus came over, rubbing rain from his mustache. "You stayed inside the line." Ethan looked at him. "That's supposed to be praised, and for you, yes." Ryan joined them, carrying an empty crate. "For the culvert, too. Brave public servant. Took down a truck with nothing but erosion and commitment." Ranger exhaled through his nose. Ethan almost smiled. Then Lauren approached with her phone in hand. "Grace says Willow and the pups are stable." Ash gained an ounce. The words reached Ethan with more force than the raid had. He nodded once because more would have shown too much. They drove back toward town through thinning rain. The operation had ended, but the evidence in the blue salt bags had opened doors into darker rooms. Ethan knew it by Natalie's face. Coal Dock was not the end, it was proof. By evening, Port Angeles wore the fragile brightness that comes after a storm finally tires of itself. The clouds lifted just enough to show a bruised strip of sky above the harbor, and water ran in clean lines along the curbs. Ethan drove first to Monroe Veterinary, not home. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, muddy paws planted on the mat, eyes forward with the stern dignity of a dog who had personally negotiated the morning and found most humans undertrained. Ethan did not tease him. Some dignity deserved room. Through the clinic window, he saw Willow curled around her puppies under low light. Ruby had positioned herself across Willow's front leg, a tiny queen with no respect for medical advice. Theo slept with his nose tucked against Ash. Ash slept and breathed. Grace came out holding a chart against her chest. Her face looked carved from exhaustion and satisfaction. "He gained weight," she said before Ethan could ask. "Do not make me say it twice, or I will become sentimental and then angry." Good, Ethan said. It came out too small for what it carried. Grace studied him. That all, for now. Her mouth softened by half an inch. That is new. Ranger moved to the treatment room door and sat watching Willow through the glass. Willow lifted her head. The two shepherds looked at each other without drama. No greeting, no claim, just recognition between animals who had stood near fear and come back with something alive. Ethan watched until Grace cleared her throat. I know you are developing a personality again, but you still smell like coal, Doc. Go home and shower before the puppies file a complaint. Ruby already did. Ruby has standing. Home was different when Ethan reached it. Not repaired, not absolved. The cabin still held boxes along the wall. The bedroom door remained closed. Rain still dripped from the roof into the cracked planter Hannah had used for herbs, but the porch light looked less like a witness and more like an invitation. Ethan sat in the truck with both hands on the wheel for a long moment. The real estate sign leaned inside the front window, red letters facing the room. He had meant to leave before the spring. He had told himself selling the cabin would be an act of mercy. Let the house belong to people who did not flinch when a kettle clicked. Let Ranger live with Grace for a while maybe, or with someone who did not carry absence into every room. He had arranged a life made of departures because staying had looked too much like kneeling before failure. Now the house smelled faintly even from the porch of smoke-damp wool puppy formula and the old cedar Hannah loved. It had become difficult to call that empty. He did not remove the sign that night. That mattered too. Some decisions deserved not to be stolen by adrenaline. He went inside, showered until the smell of diesel and salt left his skin, then sat at the kitchen table with Hannah's stray notebook open beside Lauren's evidence copy of the Blue Salt Manifest. Ranger lay under the table, not at the bedroom door. Ethan wrote what he knew. Date, dog, condition, contact, evidence, foster status, follow-up. His handwriting looked plain beside Hannah's, but the columns made sense. Hannah had understood something he was late to learn. Kindness without records could still help for one night, but kindness with structure could keep helping after the person who started it was gone. He wrote until the wood stove burned low. Ranger's tail touched his boot once. By accident, perhaps. Ethan accepted the accident. The next day brought Claire Bennett to the clinic with Emma, a solemn 10-year-old in a purple raincoat and rain boots decorated with yellow stir. Claire had asked Grace whether Emma could see the old shepherd mix rescued from Cold Dock, not touch, not adopt. Only see. Grace had said yes with enough conditions to require breath between them. Ethan happened to be there bringing clean blankets because he had discovered that doing useful things kept his mind from walking back into darker rooms. The old shepherd mix lay in a recovery pen, white muzzle on folded fleece, red collar removed and bagged as evidence. He was not Max. His tag led to a family near Aberdeen who had cried on the phone when Lauren called. But Emma looked at him through the gate with both hands tucked into her raincoat pockets and whispered, "He looks tired of being brave." Claire put one hand on her daughter's shoulder. Ethan looked away because the sentence had found a door in him. Claire did not find Max that day. No miracle stepped into the room wearing a red collar and a familiar bark. Instead, she helped Lauren build a list missing dogs near ferry terminals. Private kennel transfers, Blue Salt dates Harbor 4. Route windows, phone numbers from old tags. It was unglamorous work, names, dates, locations, cross-checks. Emma colored quietly in Grace's break room while adults turned grief into data. Paige Carter came in through the back with a box of towels and stopped when she saw Claire. The air tightened. Paige had not stolen Max. She had not saved him either. There were many kinds of not enough. Claire looked at her for a long time. Paige's face went pale, but she did not run. "I am sorry," Paige said. "I know that does not fix anything." Claire's mouth trembled once. "No, it doesn't." Then she pointed to the laundry room. "The big towels go on the lower shelf. Grace hates reaching." Grace, passing behind them, said, "I heard that and I approve." It was not forgiveness. It was a room making space for a person willing to do the hard part without applause. Natalie Cross stayed in town 3 more days, and the evidence from Coal Dock opened cases in Oregon, Idaho, and Northern California. Grant Ellis hired a lawyer who used careful words. Luke Rader said nothing. The men from the dock talked more than either of them because men caught wet cold and afraid often discovered cooperation had a warm lobby. Lauren built records as if each page were a plank across dangerous water. Marcus assigned a deputy to every transport log. Ryan coordinated foster homes with the weary cheer of someone who had decided bureaucracy was less painful if mocked respectfully. Ethan drove between the cabin clinic, sheriff's office, and hardware store, fixing what needed fixing, carrying what needed carrying, saying little. At the cabin, Ranger no longer slept at Hannah's door every night. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he slept near the stove. Sometimes he stood in the hallway as if checking whether Ethan had noticed the difference. One evening, Ethan found a small envelope tucked inside Hannah's notebook. It had slipped between pages and waited there with the unfair patience of paper. On the outside, Hannah had written, "Ethan someday, maybe." He sat down before opening it. The cabin was quiet except for the stove and Ranger's breathing. The note inside was short. "If you are reading this because I am gone and you are packing the house like a soldier clearing a room stop for 1 cup of coffee, then look outside. If the porch light still works, this place still has a job. You do not have to keep it for me. But do not leave only because grief sounds like an order." Ethan read it once, then again. Ranger raised his head from the rug. Ethan looked at the real estate sign in the window, then at the porch light shining through rain. His phone buzzed before he could move. Grace. Her message said, "Ash is refusing food. Come now if you want to hover usefully." The cabin dropped away, and Ethan was already reaching for his keys. Rain returned hard over Freshwater Bay, hammering the windshield as Ethan drove toward Monroe Veterinary with Ranger braced in the passenger seat. The road shone black and silver beneath the headlights, and every bend seemed longer than it had been the day before. Ethan had faced enough emergencies to know when fear was useful and when it was only noise. That night it was both. Ash had survived freezing rain week lung separation from Willow bad men, and the rough luck of being born too early in a place that counted bodies by code. Refusing food should have been a medical problem, not a judgment from the universe. Still, Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel until Ranger leaned once into his shoulder. "Not hard. Enough." "I know," Ethan said. "I am driving like Grace is already mad." Ranger exhaled through his nose, which seemed fair. Grace met them at the clinic door. Her hair was coming loose from its clip, her jacket was zipped wrong, and her eyes had the sharp focus of someone who had already argued with death and disliked its attitude. "Treatment room 2. Quiet." Ethan followed. Willow lay on a blanket beneath warm, light body curled around Ruby and Theo. Ash rested apart on a folded towel, small head turned sideways. Breathing shallow but steady. He had milk on his nose and none in his belly. Ruby made an offended sound at Ethan's arrival. Theo tried to crawl toward Ranger and was blocked gently by Willow's paw. Willow watched Ethan with wary recognition. She did not welcome him. She did not object. In some lives, that was a generous middle ground. Grace warmed formula and checked Ash's mouth belly temperature and hydration. "He is not crashing," she said. "He is tired. There is a difference, and I will keep explaining it until men stop turning every pause into a funeral." Ethan nodded. His voice would not work yet. Ranger moved to the edge of the towel and lowered himself slowly. Willow lifted her head. Grace froze. Ethan did too. Ranger did not look directly at Willow. He placed his chin near Ash, not touching, and breathed slow through his nose. Ash stirred. Once. Twice. The tiny pup's mouth opened, searching without strength. Grace slid the syringe forward. "Well," she whispered, "if the consultant insists." One drop. Ash swallowed. Ethan's knees nearly went weak with the smallness of it. Another drop. Then another. Ruby complained because attention had become unfairly distributed. Ryan Price, who had arrived with coffee and a medical bag, though no one had called him, leaned into the doorway. "I brought emotional support caffeine." Grace did not look away from Ash. "Set it down and be useful by not breathing loudly." Ryan whispered, "My finest work." Ethan laughed once quietly, and the sound did not break. Ash swallowed again. The scare passed by morning. Not dramatically. No swelling music, no sudden transformation from fragile to sturdy. Ash simply took enough food to move the room from fear to work. Ethan slept 2 hours in a clinic chair with Ranger's head on his boot. When he woke, Grace handed him a cup of coffee that tasted like punishment and mercy mixed together. "He will have setbacks," she said. "Do not make each one a prophecy." Ethan rubbed both hands over his face. "I am learning." Grace leaned against the counter. Painfully slowly, but yes. Through the treatment room glass, Willow nursed all 3 pups while Ruby kicked Theo in the chin. Theo accepted the blow with unnecessary nobility. Ranger watched as if conducting a safety inspection. Ethan took the scene into himself, carefully aware that gratitude could hurt when a man had gone too long without practicing it. Spring arrived in the Olympic Peninsula without Grace. It came muddy late and suspicious of calendars. Snow retreated from the higher shoulders of the hills, leaving the cedars dark and shining. The creek behind Ethan's cabin broke free, one cold thread at a time. The days lengthened. Light found the corners where boxes had waited and made them look less like endings. The puppies came to the cabin 2 weeks later under a formal foster hold that Lauren explained in enough detail to frighten furniture. Willow came with them, stronger now, but not soft. She stepped from Grace's Van sable coat, brushed clean torn ear, visible white paw bright against the wet grass. Ethan did not reach for her. Ranger walked onto the porch and stopped halfway down the steps. Willow looked at him first, then toward the cabin, then toward the carrier where Ruby had begun legal proceedings against confinement. Willow entered because her puppies were inside. Ethan respected the difference. The first week was not beautiful. It was work. Towels everywhere. Formula on the counter. Medicine schedules taped to cabinet doors, paw prints on the floor, Willow checking exits, Ranger pretending he did not care while positioning himself where every pup could find him. Ethan kept records in neat columns because Grace threatened to laminate his failures if he did not. Paige came 3 times with clean blankets and left with dirty ones. She did not ask to touch Willow. She did not ask anyone whether she was forgiven. She scrubbed crates until her cracked hands reddened again, labeled medication times in block letters, and sat once outside a recovery pen with her back turned to a frightened black shepherd until the dog took one bite from a bowl placed behind her. Claire watched that from the laundry doorway. She said nothing, but later she placed hand cream beside Paige's gloves. Small mercies could be stern too. The idea for Porchlight Canine Fund began at Ethan's kitchen table on a night when rain came soft instead of hard. Ethan did not call it a dream. Dreams had become suspicious things full of promises they expected a person to believe. It began as a problem. More dogs had been found. Some needed medical care. Some needed short-term quiet homes. Some could not go to ordinary fosters yet. Grace had medical skill but limited space. Lauren had authority but not beds. Marcus had deputies but not volunteers. Ryan had rescue contacts and bad jokes, both unexpectedly useful. Claire had shipping record spreadsheets and a mother's memory for details other people missed. Paige had knowledge of kennel habits from the inside. Ethan had land a cabin and Hannah's notebook full of old kindness waiting to become structure. Lauren wrote at the top of a legal pad, Porchlight Canine Fund. A fund first, she said. Training medical assistants approved fosters' transport logs. No informal handoffs. No rescuing every dog because guilt puts on boots. Ryan nodded solemnly. Guilt should not operate heavy equipment. Ethan looked at Hannah's notebook beside Lauren's pad. If the Porchlight still works, this place still has a job. The sentence from Hannah's letter had taken up residence inside him. He did not know if keeping the cabin meant healing. He no longer demanded words that large. It meant tonight there was warmth. It meant records. It meant a fenced recovery yard behind the shed and a bench under the cedar where frightened dogs could learn weather did not always bring harm. Marcus helped repair the gate. Ryan carried lumber and complained with professional stamina. Claire built the first volunteer spreadsheet and made every field mandatory because, as she said, chaos had already had its turn. Paige cleaned. Grace inspected everything and found 9 faults, which she described as an encouragingly low number. Ranger lay near the porch steps while Ash investigated every screw Ethan dropped as if the future required tasting it. Willow healed slowly. Her body improved before her trust did. She tolerated Ethan. She accepted Ranger. She allowed Grace to examine the puppies with a look that promised consequences if medicine became rude. Ruby grew bold enough to attack bootlaces. Theo chose Ranger's front leg as his preferred sleeping property. Ash did not become strong quickly. He became determined. He followed Ethan's boots across the kitchen, fell over. Nothing stood up, insulted, and once tried to bark at a pine cone until Ranger looked at Ethan with weary betrayal. Ethan said, "Do not involve me." Ranger stared harder. Ethan laughed. Not almost. Not a sound pretending to survive. He laughed and the cabin received it like a window opened after a long winter. Outside in the recovery yard, Hannah's wildflower seeds waited in a drawer. Ethan found them the next morning, packets labeled in her handwriting, lupine, yarrow mountain, aster, blanket flower. Some might not take. Some had waited too long. He planted them anyway. On the day the fence sign went up, the sky finally cleared for nearly an hour. Ryan had carved Porchlight by hand, uneven but proud, and Claire's daughter, Emma, had painted a small yellow lamp beside the word. No one called it perfect. That helped. Willow stood in the yard and watched from the shade while Ruby wrestled Theo and Ash climbed over Ranger's paw with great expeditionary courage. Lauren brought preliminary release paperwork for some of the dogs. Grace brought vaccines and opinions. Paige brought fresh towels. Claire brought Emma, who stood beside the old shepherd from Coal Dock during a supervised visit. The dog, whose name had turned out to be Cooper, leaned into the fence near her hand. Claire covered her mouth. Emma whispered, "He can be tired here." Ethan turned away to give them privacy. When he looked back toward the cabin, the real estate sign still leaned inside the window. Before he could cross the yard, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. No threat this time. A photo. A list of 3 missing dogs from another state. Beneath it, a message from Natalie Coal Dock opened more doors. "Are you ready for the long work?" Early May came to Port Angeles in fragments of gold between long curtains of rain. The Olympic foothills stayed dark at the shoulders, but the grass behind Ethan Hayes' cabin brightened. and the first wildflower seedlings pushed through the turned earth beside the new recovery fence. Porchlight Canine Fund was not grand. It had no polished sign, no dramatic ribbon, no promise to fix every wound the world invented. It had a legal account, a volunteer checklist, a line of clean crates, 3 trained foster homes. Grace Monroe's frightening medical standards, Lauren Blake's paperwork, Marcus Reed's transport logs, Ryan Price's rescue contacts, Claire Bennett's spreadsheets, Paige Carter's quiet hands, and a porch light that stayed on through bad weather. Ethan had learned to admire useful things more than impressive ones. Useful things had saved Ash. Useful things had brought Willow back. Useful things had kept him from running into the woods with grief pretending to be courage. Willow was the first to leave, though. Leave was too blunt a word for what happened. Jonah and Elise Martin, a retired couple from Sequim, visited 3 times before anyone mentioned adoption. Jonah had Carpenter's hands swollen at the knuckles and a voice so low dogs leaned closer to hear it. Elise wore a blue rain jacket, carried treats in the wrong pocket, and asked Grace more questions about Willow's comfort than her obedience. They sat on the far side of the recovery yard and spoke to each other about ordinary things. Raised garden beds, the ferry schedule, whether the neighbor's maple would survive another windstorm. Willow watched them for nearly an hour the first visit. On the second, she lay down. On the third, she fell asleep with her head turned toward them instead of toward the gate. Grace whispered to Ethan, "That is as close to a signed endorsement as she gives." Willow went home with them on a clear afternoon, not eager, not afraid, but willing. Before she stepped into the crate, she touched each pup with her nose. Then she looked at Ranger. Ranger lowered his head once. Some goodbyes did not require people to translate them. Ruby went to Mara Jenkins, a retired park ranger with a gray braid, a weathered face, and the calm authority of a woman who had spent 30 years telling lost hikers they were less prepared than they believed. Ruby bit Mara's bootlace within 5 minutes. Mara smiled. "Good. Backbone." Grace looked at Ethan. "I like her." "Ruby or Mara?" "Yes." Theo chose Ryan by falling asleep inside his rescue jacket during a transport meeting and refusing to leave with the solemn commitment of a taxpayer defending property rights. Ryan tried to object. No one believed him. 3 days later, he sent a picture of Theo sleeping in a dog bed so large it looked like it required its own zoning permit. Ash stayed at the cabin under a foster hold, then an extended foster, then pending release, then one final form Lauren placed on Ethan's kitchen table with the dry ceremony of a notary public and the small smile of a person trying to hide from her own satisfaction. Ethan signed first, Grace signed second, Lauren signed third. Ryan insisted Ash needed executive approval, so they pressed one small paw into non-toxic ink and placed it badly on the page. Ash objected to ink paper law and being cleaned. Ranger watched the entire process from beside the stove with the expression of an old judge enduring procedural chaos. When it was done, Ash belonged to Ethan in the narrow legal sense, but in the larger truth, he had already belonged to the cabin for weeks. He slept against Ranger's side, followed Ethan's boots, attacked dust, barked once at the broom, and then hid behind the very dog he intended to become. Ranger suffered him with grave patience. One afternoon, Ash latched onto Ranger's ear and hung there for 3 whole seconds. Ranger turned his head slowly toward Ethan. Ethan raised both hands. "Do not bring me into this!" Ranger's stare deepened. Ethan laughed again, full and startled. The sound moved through the cabin without apology. Claire and Emma did not find Max in the weeks that followed. Natalie warned them early that they might never get a clean answer. And Claire accepted the truth with the stiff grace of a woman who had stopped asking people to make grief prettier. But Cooper, the old shepherd mix from Coal Dock, had no living owner able to take him. His Aberdeen family had been found, and they had cried because they loved him. But illness and housing had changed their lives beyond what love alone could repair. They gave permission through tears. Claire took Emma to visit Cooper 7 times. Emma sat outside his pen reading chapter books aloud in a voice that stumbled on big words and kept going. Cooper began by ignoring her. Then he slept while she read. Then he leaned his old white muzzle against the fence. The day he went home with them, Emma clipped a new red collar around his neck and said, "You do not have to be Max, you can just be Cooper." Claire turned away, shoulders shaking. Paige, who had been carrying towels down the hall, stopped, then kept walking. Some moments needed no audience. Paige remained with Porchlight as a volunteer under rules Lauren made very clear. She did not handle records alone. She did not transport dogs without another person. She attended every training Grace offered and took notes in large, careful handwriting. Some people in town crossed the street when they saw her. Some thanked her. Both made her uncomfortable. Ethan did not offer absolution. He offered tasks. Clean crates. Label medication. Sit near the frightened black shepherd with your back turned until he eats. Paige did them. One evening, Ethan found her outside the recovery pen holding a bowl behind her while the black shepherd took one bite, then another. Paige cried silently, head bowed, as if the sound might frighten him. Ethan set a clean towel on the bench beside her and went back inside. There were many ways to begin making amends. Most did not look like speeches. The federal case stretched beyond town. Coal Dock evidence opened investigations in 3 states, then 5. Grant Ellis's polished words thinned under documents. Luke Rader discovered silence did not erase phone records. Other dogs were found, not all. Enough to keep the work from becoming abstract. Natalie sent updates in short messages that never promised more than facts. Lauren built better channels between clinics and animal control. Marcus assigned deputy hours to transport checks. Ryan organized foster trainings where he told volunteers that love was not a substitute for cleaning supplies paperwork, and the humility to say no when a house was full. Grace frightened away several people who thought rescue meant sad photographs and praise. Ethan admired her more each time. Claire's spreadsheets became the thing everyone pretended not to depend on and absolutely did. Hannah's notebook stayed on the kitchen table, no longer hidden, no longer treated like museum glass. Used. Sacred in the way a shovel can be sacred when it digs a place for seed. The afternoon Ethan removed the real estate sign, nothing dramatic happened. No thunder, no sudden shaft of light, no voice from heaven telling him grief had expired. Rain tapped the windows. Ash slept under the table. Ranger lay near the stove with mud drying on his paws. Ethan picked up the sign from the front window, carried it to the kitchen, folded it once, and placed it in the drawer beneath Hannah's letter. Then he stood with one hand on the drawer handle. "Looks like we are staying," he said. Ranger lifted his head. For a long moment the dog only watched him with those amber eyes that had once felt like judgment, because Ethan had not been ready to see grief in any face but his own. Then Ranger rose slowly, crossed the kitchen, and placed his head on Ethan's knee. Fully, deliberately, as if the decision had taken nearly a year and still deserved dignity. Ethan closed his eyes and set his hand on the dog's head. "I am here," he said. Small words, true ones. Outside, the porch light came on as evening settled over Freshwater Bay. It lit the wet steps, the new fence, the uneven porch light sign, and the rows of soil where Hannah's flowers might or might not grow. Inside, the cabin held the smell of wood smoke, clean towels, puppy breath, coffee, old pine, and rain drying from a German shepherd's coat. Ash woke, climbed over Ranger's front leg, and collapsed there as if he had crossed a continent. Ranger sighed with noble suffering. Ethan laughed softly and reached for the notebook. There would be more calls, more storms, more records. More animals arriving with fear in their bodies and no language for what had been done to them. The work would be long, and long work did not shine the way miracles did. Maybe that was why it could be trusted. Ethan could not change the day he came home too late. He could not bring Hannah back or make Ranger's grief disappear on command, but he could keep the porch light burning. He could answer the next small cry in the rain. He could stay. Sometimes healing does not arrive as a bright miracle that fixes everything at once. Sometimes it comes quietly through a cold porch, a tired dog, a neighbor brave enough to tell the truth, or one small life that still needs warmth. Ethan learned that love does not end where loss begins. God can leave a little light in the places we thought were empty. Not to erase our sorrow, but to guide us towards someone who needs the mercy we still have to give. If this story touched your heart, comment Amen. And remember someone in your life who may need a gentle word today. Share this story with a friend or family member who is carrying grief, regret, or loneliness. May your home be filled with peace. May your heart find courage for the long work of love, and may grace meet you exactly where you are.